Hello, good evening. Assalamualaikum. How are you? Recording not yet started. Let's wait for 2 more minutes and then we'll start for today's session. Do you see any banner like this is live streaming on YouTube kind of thing? Okay, if you see that, then no need to worry about that. It's a kind of I'm testing the streaming works fine or not from Zoom. So it's a private stream itself. This is not a public stream. All right, so let's start the recording. All right. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's session. And today we are going to talk about create model calculation using DAX in Power BI. So, DAX is actually one of the important thing in Power BI because if you are working for Power BI, then you need to be aware of DAX. The reason is because you are going to work on DAX on a regular daily basis because all our calculations depends on the DAX itself. So we'll talk more about that in the next slide. So for the introduction, so DAX actually stands for Data Analysis Expressions. So DAE, DAX actually for that. And it is developed by Microsoft. And it's a kind of library of functions and operators which it contains. So usually if you are from Excel background, if you are aware of Excel, then you will easily get up with the DAX calculations here because it works in a similar fashion itself. But if you are new to DAX, I mean, you don't know anything about Excel, you are a fresher candidate, then in that case also, you don't need to worry about that. There are some small things which you need to understand. You can gear up on that. So this is going to be a kind of initial stage of the DAX journey because you need to be in-depth aware of those things in order to get well versed on the DAX calculations. So we are going to build the formulas and expressions on the DAX, and through DAX we can create calculated columns, calculated tables, and measures as well. So we can create multiple things on that. So first of all, what does it measures? So there are tables, measures, and calculate columns, right? So what is measures here? So measures are summarization of the data. So what you have it on your data model, it's a kind of summarization of. So like we have seen in the last sessions, and even we are going to see that again on today's session, which is like sum of sales amount or sum of quantity. So both the things are kind of we are aggregating the value, right? It can be an average of the time duration, or it can be mean, median, anything depends on the business requirement. So generally it will be like count and sum itself, or minimum or maximum. So those things can be calculated using measures. So we'll talk about the difference between the measures and calculate columns in the future slides. So now let's talk about the calculate columns. So calculate column actually calculates row by row level. So when you're working on that, so it actually, a table you can see it on the screen, we have a quantity and a price. So quantity multiplied by price is equal to total price. So can you just give me a second? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So if you're hearing something in my background, yeah, please let me know. Yeah, because children are playing in the background, so there's maybe there's some sounds will come up. All right, so calculate column is basically we need to calculate at the row by row level, right? So if it's basically we are want to calculate total price, then we need to calculate sum of the sales quantity multiplied by unit price. So we'll get the total price value on. So this actually attached to a table, whereas the measures is not attached to a table, but this attached to a table actually. So the calculate table basically, which is not actually available on the slide. So it actually the same thing refers to creating a table in a Power BI data model. So if you want to create a table, like if you want to create a date table, then we can use that also. So there are certain functions where we can create a table itself using the DAX. So there we can use those functions on that. And just give me a minute. Yeah, thank you for that. It's a summer holidays, so children are playing here. No worries. So now, so that's a table. We have a calculate table as well. So table is nothing but we can create a table like the date table also we can create for our information. So it can add the regular table itself, how we are getting the data from different sources, which you have seen in our previous sessions. Like we can get the data in Power Query and load it into Power BI Desktop. Like similar to that, we can create also a table using DAX function also. This may be helpful for you while you're working for a certain projects where you don't have any options to create in Power Query, whereas you can create a DAX in table in the DAX also. Like you can create a date table on that. Or maybe if you want to calculate something and you want to showcase it in a summarized manner, then also you can do that. So now the major difference between is like the majority of the things which you are working on day-to-day basis is like calculate columns and measure. So what is the difference between these two things? So calculate columns creates a value for each row in a table, like you have seen in the previous slide. And calculate column actually stores occupy space on your Power BI data model itself. So it has a different functionality and usage for that. So it depends on that. If you want to calculate row by row, then you have to use calculate column itself. Whereas if you want to calculate aggregated value and it has to generate only based on user interaction, in that case, you can create measures. So measures also, actually, if you user want to filter anything on the data, then it actually filters the measures. Whereas the calculated column actually generates, populates, whenever you refresh your entire Power BI file, the data gets loaded from the source, and then the calculate column gets generated on that. So in that case, it is fixed value. So it's not going to change any value unless you refresh your entire data model. Whereas the measure is not like that. So measures can behave based on your filtration, based on your thing. It's a kind of dynamic thing, the measure, and calculate column is a kind of static thing. Once the refresh is complete, it's not going to change the value. So that's the thing. So yeah. So another important concept of DAX is understanding the context. So there are certain contexts which we have. I will just cover on a high level on this one because covering the advanced is not a part of this entire boot camp. But still, just as an overview, I'd like to say like we have a kind of filter context and query context in row context as well in DAX. So what does it mean actually? So if I go to my Power BI file and then if I expand this internet sales, so last time we created a measure, which is basically zoom here. We can click on this three dot icon and then click on new measure here. So once you click on that, this will open up a window like this. And here we have an option. We zoom in here. Yeah, I've just given a name here, which is total sales. And this is equal to sum of fact internet sales amount. So it's actually summing up all the values on the sales amount column. But we have not defined anything here which need to filter the data. We're just saying that it has to sum that these things here. So when I use this here in a card visual, let me zoom out here. So we have a card visuals in Power BI on the top ribbon. If I use this same total sales here, it's going to show us some value, which is 29 29.36 million is showing up here. Whereas if you see it here on the top of this graph, which is the table here, this is actually the total sales. As you can see it here, it is, we have selected total sales here, which is the green tick here. So it actually changed the data here, even though the total value is showing up here 29.3 million, which is actually the same value here at the last of the row here, but it actually filters based on the calendar year also. So how does it work? So that's where the row context applies here. So we have a relationship between the fact internet sales table and the date table here. As you can see, we have a fact internet sales here, and we have a dim date table. So it is now linked between the full date alternate key, and this should be the order date here. If I mouse over here, you can see the highlighted here. So this is actually the relationship between these two things. And on the visual here, we actually use the calendar year, which is coming from a dim date table. So if we add a year from the dim date table and add the measure of the total sum sales here on this table, then it actually understands the relationship between the dim date table as well as the dim fact internet sales, and it actually filters the data based on the year selection. I mean, it depends on what the column, which was the row which are used here. Here in our case, we are used as a year in the row section. So it is actually filtering year by year values and giving us a result here. That's the beauty of the DAX measures. So it actually filters depending upon our relationship built on here. So even when you're working on your real-time project, sometimes you may see that it is showing same result for everything. So if I just for a moment, if I click on this relationship, and then if I turn off this relationship, I'm just making it to be inactive and click on apply changes. And then if I go back to my report, now you see it is actually populating the same value, which is 29.36 million for each and every row of the table, even though it has given the data from 2017 to 2022 and even a blank value here because the year is not available yet. I will explain that later on. So it gives every year from the calendar, and it gives the same value for each and every row here. This reason is because of the relationship between the table which we have used on this particular visual. So we are used here dim date, and here we have used fact internet sales. So because of the relationship is not available or is inactive, it is not actually filtering the data. So in order to work the filter context, you have to make sure the relationship is there and it is in active state. So if I again go back here and make this to be active relationship here, previously it was showing from 2017, right? And now if I go back to this one, now it is showing up from 2018 to 2021. So that's the here. So now by default, if there is a kind of zero value or null values available on the fact internet sale, so by default it will hide from this visual. That's how it will work here. So that's the reason the calendar year 2017 was there and 2022 also was there. So as there is no record available on the fact internet sales for those period, and that's the reason it has actually removed those information from this visual. And previously, just before making this relationship active, we have seen there is a kind of blank on the year column, right? The reason is because let's find out one thing here. If I go to this dim date and click on the calendar year, so I can see it start from 2017 and ends at 2022, right? And if I go to even, yeah, it starts from, if I click on the full date alternate key, this will be helpful because I just can see the start and end date exactly. So it starts from July 2017, 1st of July, and ends at 26 March 2020. No, actually, we need to sort this by descending because there's a limitations to showing up here. So it's end at June 30, 2022. So that's how the data which we have in the dim date table. But if I go to the fact internet sales and check on the order date one, we have data starting from January 2018. That's great. If I sort this by descending, so it actually showing up here till 2021. That's great. So usually if there is a blank value available means we have a date on this particular table, but it is not available on this dim date table. That's the reason it's showing up blank and there is some value on that. And because of the improper relationship, we had that issue. Sometimes what may happen is like we have a sales on 2016, for example, but we don't have a calendar period for 2016. In that case, we will have a blank cell here on the calendar year, and we'll have some values on this part. So that's how it is. You can find in your real-time project if you're working on that. All right. So this is how actually it filters this one. Not only on this case, let's say, for example, if I open up the another table, which is product two. Yeah, actually, we have used the star schema approach in previous session. That's good. Okay, if I move around here and add a kind of another chart, which is now focusing on total sales here. All right. So if I just use total sales, it is giving me nothing. I mean, it's showing up some value. It's actually, if I turn on the data label, is 29 million, which is round off here, 29.36 million. Whereas if I just drag and drop the category name here on the x-axis, it filters the data, which is bikes is 28 million, accessories 1 million, and clothing is less than that. So if I just use the data label to show up here, the value section to be digits, which you can change here. I scroll down, we have a decimal place. If I set this to be 2 decimal point, and you can see it here on this one. Yeah. So now you can see the value which is showing up here. So this actually applies the filter context here, where based on the relationship and between the two tables and based on the value which you are adding up on the visual, it actually filters the data here. So that's what we have it here as kind of context transitions. This is happening here, total sales by year, and total sales by year, and the product ID here. And that's actually the filter context. And the row context actually refers to it filters by row here. And for example, this actually happening within a visual, right? So that's how it is. We are adding up the visual here and showing up the value here. Whereas, for example, if I add a slicer on the page, and it should be like sales deleted. So let's add a slicer on the page. And then if I add a sales territory group here, you can see Europe, North America, and Pacific here. We have a sales value showing up here, which is overall for all the sales territory group. Now, if I just want to look for North America, you can just select here on the slicer, which is kind of act as a filter here. So now you see it has filtered everything here. So this is now 11.37 million, and it's actually filtering up for that particular region. I mean, the North America, it's actually showing up the value here. And this is the bike sales, accessory sales, and clothing sales for the North America region, irrespective of any year. And here, irrespective of any category which is showing up here. So the thing which is happening inside the visual is actually the row context. And if this is happening, which is outside of the visual, it is actually called as a kind of filter context. So we're applying any additional filter here on top of the existing filter. So here the filter context applied here, and here applies the row context here. All right. So that's the one we have here. And next thing is the best part, which is the calculate. So calculate is one of the core function in Power BI. I used to call this as kind of queen of DAX, because without this one, if you're developing any Power BI report, then you are not develop any complex report. I can say even the basic report for the certain requirements, you need to use the calculate functions in order to work on them. Like also, we have also used on the previous sessions as well. As if I open up this total sales by ship date, as you can see, we have used calculate here. So what we're doing up here, calculate total sales, which is again the same one, which is a measure. And we are using this use relationship function for the full date alternate key. This has to be by ship date key. So by default, the relationship active for the order date, not for the ship date. And for these particular calculations, it actually reverse this one, and it actually activate this ship date and full date alternate key relationship, and then does the calculation for us. And that's what we have seen in our previous session, that we can see a difference value if you are using up here. So if I add here, so this is basically the 2018 sale here, and this is because of 2019 sale here. And now you can see which is showing up here, calendar year, and here is showing up 7842. If I go to this one, fact internet sales, and click on the ship date here on this part. So even we have a blank values here. So we have not shipped here. And if we see this one, start from 2018, if we start this by descending, so it's at January 2021. So there are blank dates available on that period, right? So we are seeing the initial thing. So that's also one of the reasons it's showing up here blank on this visual. So there may be multiple reasons. So you need to figure it out manually on that. Yeah, one more thing which I want to highlight here, apart from this, is like we have a kind of table view in Power Query as well as here on Power BI Desktop here. So whatever filtration, if you're doing up here, like how I'm doing up here, sorting up this table, and if I want to filter something on this here, this is only happening on this particular window. It doesn't have any impact on your data model, on even on your report visual here. It's not going to have any impact on that. But in Power Query, if you are making any kind of changes there and click on apply and close, then it will apply those changes on your data model itself. If you are making this kind of analysis manually for yourself for the testing purpose, then make sure you are doing up here, not in Power Query. Unless it is required in Power Query, you can filter the data. But until then, make sure that you are using up here this table view, not in Power Query. All right, so that is one of the reason. And the next thing here is calculate also will dig more deeper into that one. So for example, here on this case, we have a total sales. So let's remove the category for now. We have a total sales here, which is 11.37 for North America. And if you want to calculate for a specific year kind of period, like 2015, in that case, what you can do, so you can click on this measure on the top ribbon. Also, we have option to create a new measure. So right now we have data from 2018 to 2021. So we can just look for 2020 data. So creating a new measure now, and then you can see the value. Sometimes it is taking much more time than expected. All right. So here says 2020, for example. This is not a good year, but still we'll use that. So calculate, and then we can use the total sales amount, which is the measure name, total sales. And then comma, we can use here dim date year, because I just want to filter. So whenever you're working on any kind of calculation, the thumb rule, the standard practice is to filter on the dimension table, not on the fact table, because we already have a relationship, right? So it is good to filter on the dimension table. So I want to filter the year. I can directly go and filter on the fact table, but that's not a recommended thing. So we need to use this one, which is basically the dim date here. So dim date calendar year is equal to 2020, which is showing up here, and close the bracket and hit enter. All right, now if I add the same thing, so let's change this graph into another one, in a vertical one, which is a clustered column chart, and add this visual here. So now you can see it is showing up here 6.5 milliamps is showing up here, and it's showing up 6.5 here. And 11.37 is the overall thing here. So that's the beauty here. Now, if I drag and drop the year column onto this section from the dim date calendar year on the x-axis here for this visual, let's hide this visual for now. All right. Now, if I zoom this one, which is if I zoom this one, so this is actually showing 6.5, which is sales for 2020. And in 2018, it's showing up here the same thing. And you see the dark blue is actually the sales for 2020, whereas the light blue is basically sales for every year, which is on the x-axis, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 21, 22 kind of thing. So from here, what we understand is like, even though we have a kind of row contest available here, as a kind of filter contest available here on this particular visual, right? It is filtering the value of 2018 for these light blue colors. That's working perfectly fine. But if we are using anything on the calculate functions and specifying anything here on your DAX measure, it actually overrides the filter. So here, that's what it has happened here. So this is also one of the context transitions which you need to understand. even though we have a filter context applied on this visual, the row context also applied here. But still, if you have add something here, it actually overrides that calculation for you, and it gives only for this particular thing here. Behind the scene, it actually removes the filter everything, and it applies only the filter which you have mentioned on that particular formula, on that particular measure. That's what it is. It is actually applicable only for the thing which is on the inside the visual here. There is also one more DAX which I highly recommend to tell you on that, is like, if behind the scene actually, because why I want to tell you that, how this actually works is behind the scene, when this one, the DAX measure, inform this to formula engine in Power BI and then get the data from the storage engine here. So that actually works is like, it actually removes the filter on this calendar year column. So we have a DAX function which is called all, and then it actually applies the dim date calendar year. So close the bracket and all. This is how it actually works. So it removes all the filters applicable on this particular thing, which is on the year, dim date year, and then applies a new filter, which is year equal to 2020. That's what it actually does. So if I click on hit enter, and you will not see any changes here, because that's how actually it works behind the scene. Even if you add the same logic, it's not going to have any impact on that. But if there is a requirement that you don't want even to apply this sales territory group for you, it has to show you the 29.6 million, which is applied here, right? In that case, you need to use the same function, but without anything here. So I will show you that. So if I click on this and just keep this dim all and then open close bracket, then hit enter now. Now you see, instead of 6.5 million, let's see what the value it gives here. You see it's showing up here 16.35 and showing up 16.35. That's the value which is showing up here. That's strange value. Is there any filter applied over here? If I remove this filter from here, you see you will not see any difference here, showing up 16.3 itself here. Yeah, the 16.3 which is showing up here, it actually for the year 2020 here. So what actually it has done now is that not only it just removes the year filter, everything on the row by row contest and showing up only for 2020, it actually also removes the filter of North America for the dark blue color here. So for the whole year of 2020, you can see it here on this particular thing, which is showing up here, 11.36 here. Sorry, 16.35. It has to show. If I remove this for now, just you can just remember the 16.35. If I remove this North America from this one, the 2020, you will see a different value, 16.35. So this is actually showing up the value for the 16.35 for 2020 year, removing all the filters within the visual and outside the visual also. So that's how it actually works. But this should not be used unless it is highly recommended for you or kind of highly required for you. The reason is because it actually removes every filter on the page. If you are going to use 10 or 20 filters, and then it brings every data on the visual, so it will have a performance impact for you. So just make sure that you're using a particular required column based on your requirement here. So in our case, I just need to filter the calendar year like how I did before. We can make use of that. So every DAX function, if you just type the name of the calculate or any DAX function, here we are use calculate and all both the thing. But if I just click on the open bracket here, now you can see there are few things here. It depends on the calculation what we are using, the function what we are using up here. Here you can see expression and then the filter. Expression is not within the square bracket, but the filter is within the square bracket. So what does it mean is like the thing which is without the square bracket, it means it is a mandatory field which you need to apply on that particular calculations. And with whatever we have it on the square bracket, it means an optional. If you want to pass any value, then you can pass that value. So here for total sales as well, if I don't want anything, then also I can just remove this here. Still this calculate function will work because the only mandatory thing is the expression. Expression is nothing but we need to apply any other measure here, or we can also type directly our own measures also inside to this area. So that's the difference between the square bracket and without the square bracket. All right, that's good to know about that. Okay, so we'll dig much more deeper into that. So we are just seeing about the use relationship function. That's totally fine. And then there are certain functions which we regularly use here, which is like if you want to compare the sales of current year versus previous year, that's a usual general requirement from every business requirement. In that case, we need to use multiple tags. So for example, if we keep the same graph here and just remove this 2020 sales here. So now you can see this is for 2018, 19, 2020, and 2021. So this is what it is. So we have it here for every year. And if you want to use that kind of time intelligence functions, so far what we are used here, the regular functions, if you are kind of working on the date time period, then we call it as a time intelligence functions in DAX. So for that, the thumb rule is you need to have a date table on your data model, and it also marked as a kind of date table in that. So that is basically, if I click on this dim date table, and here you can see on the table tools on the top ribbon, which is a new option, which is mark as a date. So click on that, is use an option about mark as a date table. And here in the pop-up window, we need to select a column. So here the date column is full date alternate key. And if I click on that, it validates that one and successfully completed here. So what is the validation it actually does is select a column to be used for a table. The column must be for data type of the date and must contain only unique values. And also it should contain the continuous date period here. If you have a date table on your data model from the source, it actually contains from Monday to Friday, not Saturday and Sunday, then this will not work for you. You need to have a date table with continuous of date period. It has to have one date column and it has to be a unique column. There must not be any repeated values on that. So you need to select a particular column. It will validate that and then click on OK. Great. So once you do so, and then you see it has changed an icon here for you. So this one is changed to a different icon, which refers to date calendar table marked as a date table. All right. So this is done. And now we need to create another DAX function. So you can click on this one and click on new measure. So I'd like to give it here sales same period last year. You can again use the calculate functions and it has to be total sales. And here I'd like to go with one more function, which we call it as same period last year. So I just want to compare the same period which is on the particular visual filter applied to the last year. So we have a date table. So here, if I open up this open bracket for the same period last year, it gives me blue one, which is the date. It is actually not on the square bracket. It means I need to pass this as a kind of mandatory thing here. So here I need to pass dim date, and then it has to be full date alternate key. I need to pass the dates here. So that's the date column which I have. So close the bracket for this one, and also I need to close one more thing, which is close here, and click on OK here. So now this will understand that if you are in 2019, then I need to show the value of 2018 here. So if I add this here, you can also drag and drop onto the visual, or we can also drag and drop on this part. So it's not working. So you can just click on the add data from this icon also, and then pick the information from here, which is sales same period last year. It's actually not accepting the value. Yeah. Now it is added here. So now you can say this information, which is for 2018, we don't have any value on 2017. So that's why it is blank. But for 2019, you can see the 3.05 light blue and 3.05 dark blue is here because it's calculating for the previous year. And similarly for 2020, we can see 1.74 from light to dark. For 2021, we can see 6.55 from light to dark here. So here, this is for the current year of 2020, which is 6.55. And 1.14 is for 2019 showing up here. So this is easily comparable for the business user to analyze the information here. One of the reason is like most of the report, they actually use a filter, a slicer on the page for the calendar year. They just want to analyze year for a particular year. So in that case, we can give them the option about to select here. For example, if I switch to 2020 alone, then this actually still applies, even though the other year 2018, 19, 21, 22, everything is gone. We can see the value of 2020, and this is the previous year. So this is actually an advantage of using that. Like I already mentioned about you. So if you are using anything on this particular measure, then whatever filter applied within the visual, it actually removes the filter and it applies the new filter for this particular given command what we are given up here. In our previous thing, what we have seen about to filter for 2020 particularly, and here it's the same period last year. So it removes for the 2020 and it actually gets the value for 2019 and showing up the value here. So that's how the filter context works here. And now we have seen for this one. So the final thing which you can see is, let's have a look on this part. We have another function where we can use the same thing, the last date. If you want to calculate inventory for the last month date, like 30, 31, which we have. If you have a kind of inventory table and you want to calculate the last date of every item, then you can make use of this function here. And then, which is the previous month, if you want to calculate for the previous month, like how we have seen for the last year, and it's actually showing up for the previous month here. So there are like, I think 300 kind of DAX functions available. So you just need to go and check out the DAX in the documentation, and you can use based on your business requirement on a regular basis. All right, so that's the thing. So this is what we are seeing, but I just want to show you one more thing before we leave here. So generally, like we want to compare the difference between these two here and show the progress of how the difference is. So in that case, we can create another DAX. So setting here, clicking on the new measure, and then we need to write here the difference. So here we can use the sales previous year difference, and this can be total sales minus sales same period last year. This is what the measure which you have created. So if I do these two things and hit enter, this will create another measure. And if I add this into the same visual, not here, it has to be on this one. So selecting on this one and clicking on this. This will add a new one, which is the sales previous year difference, which is 4.8 here. That's great. So if I want to show this in a percentage, so in that case, let's create another one. Either I can use the same one or I can create another one. So let's create another one itself so that we can have a percentage on that. So this has to be sales, sales previous year difference and percentage. We can give it a name as per our need here. And this has to be, we need to use another DAX function, which is divide. Generally, if you want to divide something, you don't need to use this slash operator here because the error handling is not happening on the slash operator. If we are sure that the denominator value is not going to be 0, in that case, you can use the slash function because that will have a good performance. But if you're not sure about whether the denominator will have a kind of 0 or not, in that case, you use the divide function here because the divide function will actually handle the errors here. Or else it will give you an error about handle divided by 0 error, like how we usually get. All right, so here we need to pass the value, which is numerator is basically the sales of difference divided by the sales of this year. Usually it has to be by previous year, right? So that's how we can see the progress. So it has to be same period last year. All right, come on. So this is like actually you can see for this one, divide numerator and denominator is on without the square bracket, alternate is on square bracket. The reason is because if there is something error, then we can apply this here to be 0. So that's the reason. And then closing this one and click on commit. So this is now we are getting up some value, and this has to be converted into a percentage. So that's why we need to click here on the top. We have a measure tools, and from here we can click on the percentage. All right. So now this will convert this into percentage. So this measure, this visual will not help us. So we need to change to another visual, which is line and cluster column chart. So click on that, then we have option about line axis. So we can just use this difference into the line axis here, because this is going to be in numbers and this is going to be in percentage. And that's the reason we need to use a different axis. So this will help us. We can have a column as well as a line here. Now you can see it is showing up some value here, which is the difference, and 275% of hike here. So now if I remove the filter of 2020 here, now we should see every year showing up here. If I click on this one, then this will focus mode and this will zoom particular visual on the. And if I go hide these things, now we see we have a value showing up here for 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, 22 here. And we see this is showing up here up and down. The reason is because for 2018, we cannot compare because we don't have any value. So that's why it is showing up here 0. And here you see it showing up here minus 42 here compared to previous year, which is 3.05. And this time we have 1.74. So it is now minus, and which is 42% in minus. Whereas for 2019 to 2020, we have 275 in positive. For 2020 to 2021, we still have a negative. So that's why it's showing up here 19% in negative here. This is how we can able to calculate the things in the DAX and then show up on the visuals here. All right, so let me, yeah, I think we are good for today. All the references for information I added on the course list itself, so you can have check on that on my website itself. So let me stop the streaming first.